You know how you purposely do something to see if someone can make it within a time frame? That was a Gemini.
That was perfect. That was perfect.
I was like, okay, will she make it back in 30 seconds? Let's see.
And she did.
And she did. Yes. She did. Hi, I am Dani Tirrell.
I'm Randy Ford.
I'm Mase III. And we're the living room.
Welcome.
I'm so glad I didn't say anything. I was like, I'm gonna stay out of that one. Like, I did my part.
Oh my God.
I welcomed us in.
I sprinted up a whole flight of steps, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should just okay. Randy sprinted up the steps to say, "Welcome to the living room." I'm so, like, let's do it over, okay?
Yes.
Where we're doing it over?
No, I'm just.
Okay. Like, we're doing it over?
We're not.
Okay.
What is the living room?
Yeah, what is the living room, Randy Ford?
It is a video podcast. It is a video podcast hosted by Dani, myself, and Mase, 3 queer, Black, trans on the spectrum artists living in Seattle, Washington. We love art. We're creatives in the city, advocates, all the things. Mase is an author releasing a book soon, or reading a book soon.
Yeah. And releasing a book and released several books. And
booked and busy. I release music. Dani is EP.
Not doing anything.
Dani has done the thing.
Dani's done.
Okay, Dani's done
anything right now.
But yes. But we talk politics, fashion, art, of course, obviously, and shoot the shit. Talk about what we want to talk about here. We're intergenerational. There
I was about to say multi-gender.
I know, right? No.
Yes. We are.
We're intergenerational, and we have a lot to say. We're gonna have some new fun things coming up in the future. A new makeup, maybe a new family vibe. But for now, just be in the living room with us. Hope you have a drink. Hope you get comfy. Mase, why don't you let them know what they can expect from us?
So in terms
you just did that.
What they can expect
from community.
So in regards to our community guidelines, our community growth, our commitment to community growth, we primarily like to center and will center Black, trans, gender nonconforming, and non-binary people. It's cool if you're not, totally cool. You're still welcome to watch and engage with us and stuff like that. But as far as who we're going to center, whose viewpoints that we are trying to uplift, that's who it is. So we're hoping that you all will stick with us as we continue to create a space for Black, trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people.
Yes. Work. We do have segments, but before we jump into our segments, I did want to just acknowledge that yesterday was World AIDS Day. And the 3 of us are on the advisory committee with 2 other queer folks. The Sully Fund, and I will put that in the comments. If you want to donate to the Sully Fund, you definitely can using going to sullyfund.org. And just wanting to give you a little bit about what it is. Just to let you all know, the Sully Fund exists to support people of African descent who identify within the spectrum of LGBTQIA. Our mission, the Sully Fund, a LGBTQIA plus community fund, founded to uplift, empower, forge a way forward, and ensure the survival of people of African descent who are without refuge, in immunocompromised, and like basic physical, mental, and health support. With a wide and narrow focus, we have developed a cohort framework to distribute funds. So what we do is we distribute funds. And our first set of funds are going to people that are LGBTQ and that identify as HIV positive. Definitely go to the sullyfund.org, www.sullyfund.org, to apply for some funding for the month of December. And then we'll have other ways that we're going to fund in the near future. So definitely check out the Sully Fund, and just wanted to bring in World AIDS Day, which was yesterday. We know many people that in this world is still HIV positive. For some reason, we're still not talking about it the way that we should. The rate amongst trans Black women and young Black gay men is still rapidly rising, especially in the South. And so just wanted to bring that to the light. We do have PrEP and we do have other means, but it's still not a cure. So just wanted to bring that in before we go into our segments. So yeah, check us out at the Suli Fund. We have blessings and bullshit.
Yes, they act like a rose and thorn of the week, a highlight, a low light, what went well, what didn't go well, and let's share.
A 10 or a chop.
A 10 or a chop. I'll start with the bullshit and then go into blessings. I want to end on a good note. Unfortunately, I heard not literally an hour ago that a family member of mine has been murdered. And through a domestic dispute, and it shook me. It's shaking me. I'm a little caught off guard. Talked to my mom about it, and it just really, really took me off guard. My mom's not the best at delivering bad news, and so she's trying to also do better at just sharing what's on her mind too. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, and of course I needed to know, but it was just it was whoa, okay. Mm-hmm. And I was like, bye. And I was like, okay, so I was like, okay, well, let me just go take care of myself and get ready for this. That kind of just had me a little off, but I did have a really good day today. Mm-hmm. I worked out, did agree with David, and that was really fun. Went on a really nice walk this morning as well. It cleared my head, cleared my mind. I've been really internal in my mind, and it's been good. It's definitely been hard, but it's definitely been for the better. And I'm really, I'm doing good. I'm seemingly well, and that's good. I'm excited for creative stuff to be releasing soon. We're going to be planning, plotting, and, twisting and turning all these, creative ideas. But I have some really fun stuff I'm going to be working on. But that's really a quick little 10 of my week. Never mind, forget it. Dani, or?
Yeah, stop. Let's be me. Okay, I'm going to talk about this. It's a blessing wrapped into some bullshit, wrapped into some blessing. It's funny. Okay. So,
it's a story.
It's a story involving one co-host.
I'm like, let me say something. It better not be me. Who is it? Who?
Thanksgiving.
Listen.
Okay, it turned out great.
Oh, that's true.
Right.
So last week was the evil day of genocide. And so me and Mr. D invited J. Mase III and Randy over, and another one of our friends who couldn't make it. And so we were like, what's everyone bringing? So a month prior to that, someone sent us this beautiful cheesecake with strawberries drizzling. And I'm going to order this cheesecake.
A photo.
It was a photo. They sent us, online. They talked about pumpkin pie. We vetoed that. So I like the full picture. So anyway, the cheesecake was strawberries drizzling down. So we were like, great, yay. And so then someone came over to the house.
Wasn't it the Geo cheesecake too?
No, the Geo cake is going to be later.
Okay.
It's going to be later at a particular launch that we can't talk about. But anyway, the Geo cake is not it. We're talking about the strawberry cake. So someone comes over and pretty much was like, okay, so we're going to do some experiments for Thanksgiving dessert. And I know we're not supposed to.
I didn't want that to be the case.
Can I finish? I'm not saying that you wanted that to be the case. What I'm saying is that you did not want experiments.
No one wants to experiment for Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving is not the time to experiment with desserts or new stuff. White people, listen. If you have a macaroni and cheese with apples and that's a new recipe, you don't do it at Thanksgiving.
It's not.
Okay. I mean, don't put macaroni and cheese and apples together, period. But I'm saying if you are going to do something like that, don't do it for Thanksgiving. So Mason was like, okay, I couldn't order the cheesecake. It would have came like in December something. So I ordered all of these other desserts. Macaroons came first, Thanksgiving macaroons. There was a cornbread macaroon. We still don't know what that is. We still don't know.
Especially because it had corn in it. That was the weird part.
Yes, it did have actual corn.
Kernels of corn in it. It was very weird.
I made it later. That's why I didn't try this. I made it later.
Yes.
But
So, yes, we had the macaroons. And so then Mace was like, I got cheesecake from Junior's. It's real famous in New York. And I was like, have you ever had Junior's? And Mace was like, no. I was like,
because we make cheesecake
good. I'm like, how do we know it's good? Like I was like, okay. So then he brings out the piece de resistance, a burnt cheesecake,
which is apparently a delicacy.
It's a Spanish. It's Spanish Mexican. Which one is it? Spanish Mexican.
It's Spanish. It's on the border of Spain and France, apparently.
Yes. Something. So burnt cheesecake,
but
and I was
in New York. Okay.
Whatever.
Don't know actually.
So I was just like, okay. So we were like, Mr. B had left the house, and if you know him, you know how he is about desserts. So I was like, okay, we have this burnt cheesecake. And I was like, Mace, let's try it before he gets here, just in case, because he's real critical. So I was like, a burnt cheesecake. Like, we're Friday. It's like, this is Thanksgiving. Like, why didn't we? It's like Mason just like, we had strawberry cheesecake on the head. We got Junior's, which he has never tried. And then we have turkey macaroons. I don't know. We have burnt cheesecake. So we're trying to hurry up and like get the burnt cheesecake before Mr. B gets back. We like Mace cuts into the cheesecake, it's crumbling. We're like, oh no. So Mr. B pulls up and we're like trying to like secretly eat the cake. Right.
It was crumbly.
It was so crumbly. But I will say this.
All in all,
the burnt cheesecake was good.
It was kind of slappy.
So I know he did not destroy Thanksgiving.
I do what I can.
Yes. So that was like the blessing wrapped into some bullshit, but it was just a whole bunch of like so. But the thing about the burnt cheesecake, I think you needed with some type of fruit or some other flavor.
It needs some kind of like.
I added fruit to mine later, and it was much better. It made it even better because it wasn't bad.
It wasn't bad.
It wasn't bad.
So,
but it did elevate.
Yes.
Tart.
Yes.
Elevated.
Yes.
Because it was.
So again, though, Thanksgiving, genocide holiday.
Yeah.
When you gather, you don't want to experiment with new stuff.
That's
like if you haven't tried it at your home before, like if you're just like, here, I'm going to present corn and marshmallow casserole.
What?
I think you should try that at home first to make sure it's good. You don't present it Thanksgiving and you've never tried it. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, touche.
Someone's probably going to make corn and marshmallow casserole. Someone is going to do that. I know it.
I hope they.
I don't want it.
Such a random. Do you want that? Because that was a very random piece of flavor.
No, that's what popped in my head because I think of weird stuff all the time.
I've never had it.
I've never had it. I don't want it, but someone is going to make corn and marshmallow
candy corn to a next level.
It's candy corn to a next level.
Like to a level.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mason, what's your blessing?
What's my blessing? Oh goodness. So my blessings are that I found new things that I like for holidays. So that's great. I think that's a blessing.
Right.
My bullshit. What is my bullshit? My bullshit is that, it's I think it's just a stressful time. Like it's stressful for a lot of different reasons. I think it's again, and we talked about this here before, but just I think especially as artists during a pandemic, we're consistently asked to do way more work than we would have been asked to do before the pandemic, and not usually for more money. And so that's what's interesting to me is I've been saying no to a lot of things and try to say no to a lot of things. I don't think I've said no to enough things, which is sort of the problem. Yeah, so I'm just like, I'm kind of, as y'all will see me, I'm kind of like trying to shovel some food in my mouth because I've not gotten to eat today, really. But yeah, so just trying to move and groove. So I'm excited to be with y'all. I'm really excited about this topic. I started plugging away at some of the points I know we're going to talk about for today. But let's see how much we all remember. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful.
Right. Right. I forgot Turkey Week was last week. I ended up cooking, and I am proud of myself because I did not check my email not one day. It was a whole inbox on Monday, but I'm proud of myself that I actually was like rested and was like, okay, let me not actually do work and actually rest. And I did it. It was accomplished. That was it. This next topic, what would we call this next? Is it a history lesson? Is it a
what we're talking about is that.
Yeah.
There's a topic.
Wait, there it is.
Yes.
Well, and even I would say even beyond trans history and mainstream LGBTQ movements, like just its exclusion, right? And just the ways in which we've been harassed or erased. Yeah, and so we're hoping that for those that are watching live and for those that are watching afterwards, that we provide some valuable stuff for y'all to get into. And primarily what it's going to entail is a lot around morality laws. And so morality laws, for people that are unfamiliar with morality laws, that's simply laws that are created that really don't have anything to do about preventing harm to anyone, but it's really about controlling the behavior of others, and especially those of targeted communities, right? Yeah. So we ready to get into some history? Everyone feels
with the historian.
I know. I'm like ready for you to get in your groove and like.
This is I wore my jacket today. I'm all ready. But so first, So what I want to really kind of do also is specifically why I think it's important for us as Black, trans, and queer non-binary folks is because trans antagonism on this continent started as part of white supremacy, and so we'll kind of start from there. But so when I think about that in the U.S., or not even the U.S., pre-U.S., in North America, period, right? I think about Balboa. So Balboa being a conquistador that came to North America in the early 1500s, and was really good at documenting all the gender nonconforming people that he saw, right? And so he saw lots of different gender nonconforming folks in North America. And he also saw that as incongruent with his Catholic faith and his mission by the people that sent him. And so he didn't just document seeing trans and non-binary people who were brown folks. He also decided to murder not just Black and brown trans folks, but just everyone that saw us as holy beings, right? Because that was not going to be in alignment with colonization, right? That in order to colonize the people, you don't just show up with weapons, you also have to kill the history of the people, right? I think so much when we were talking about this earlier, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about the Lavender Scare and things like that, but looking at even the first laws in the U.S. that came about that are anti-trans, came about after slavery abolition, or the abolition of slavery in the late 1870s. The first state to actually put in an anti-trans law in the book was Ohio, and when Ohio did that, it specifically talked about, just like Balboa talked about, us being non-alignment or somehow being unholy, all that kind of stuff. In Ohio, they specifically talked about trans people as being deceptive and deceivers. And so I think about that every time we talk about the law and how trans people, especially Black and brown trans people, are treated under the law. Usually is that we are somehow not just unworthy, but we're immoral by default, right? Yeah. And so kind of going into that stuff. I don't know, for y'all, what sort of things were you taught about, when you all started kind of coming into yourselves and coming into community, what sort of things or understandings did y'all have about anti-trans laws, or how has that history been passed down to y'all?
I mean, I will be honest, I knew nothing. I can't say that I have known something. I think identifying as a gay male beforehand, it was much more information for me, I think. And again, because trans history isn't talked about, And because when you talk about the LGBTQ movement, trans, the letter T is just thrown in there, but the idea of like history and care and what are trans people going through, like we're not a part of that. You know. So as a gay person, I don't think many people talk about trans history in the way they talk about the idea of just like gay history or lesbian history, especially with laws.
Yeah, and I think that's strategic. Like I think because a lot of what we don't talk about is the ways that a lot of rights for LGBT folks, especially cisgender folks, were fought off of seeming more normal than trans people, right?
Right.
And so, like, as we, talk about this, so even when Balboa is talking about people, right, it's easier to get people that are less able to fit in with mainstream or binary society, right? It's much easier to specifically target people who are gender nonconforming and trans versus people who may be same gender loving, right? That's actually, and while those places might, intersect, right? That is a lot easier to point out from people. And so thinking about that, even when LGBTQ organizations started becoming to form in the U.S., especially like I think about Bilitis, Daughters of Bilitis, the Mattachine Society, a lot of times they talked about themselves as, they had very strict gender presentation rules, right? Which are already cuts out a segment of people, and often talked about themselves as like, we're gay, we're lesbian, but we're not as weird as these other people, right?
Yeah.
And so, legalize our rights, right? So that you won't have to deal with these other very strange, very weird, very perverse, right? People, as they spoke about trans people frequently, right?
Right. And then I'm just putting things in the banners for you to reference and go back to do more history and more research.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I think of the first laws that I kind of were aware of, there was all kind of like biblical.
Yeah.
There was always like, a biblical moral, no, like sodomy, that's like the closest thing I could ever like think of to a law that until like I started doing this work and realizing, like legislatively, there are laws and legislation that are actually for, control of trans people, literally. And for those that don't know what sodomy is, sodomy basically, they originated in religious prohibitions against non-procreative sexual acts. And so they've existed for hundreds of years. What J. Mase was talking about, like, coming, the conquistadors coming over and, calling us savages, perverts, all that stuff. All of that is, like a way to shame, and trying to get us to, feel bad about ourselves. But it says, as the Supreme Court noted in Lawrence v. Texas, historically, sodomy prosecutions were not usually used against consenting adults acting in private, but were often a way, indeed the only way, to prosecute a sexual predator who committed an act other than vaginal intercourse against a non-consenting victim. It also says in the 19th century, there were sodomy prosecutions against consenting adults, but these appear to have been for conduct that occurred in public. And so those are kind of like, my first introductions. And now, like, when I do my research and kind of into, I'm just like, oh, that literally, like, it all is connected. It's all connected to, like, that religious morale that people still use as law, but aren't really conscious that they are doing it, I feel.
Right. I think it's also interesting that text like defines it as like, oh, there's only these few places in which it was about consenting adults, because, as we know, like, trans and queer spaces to hang out were raided all the time, right? So that police officers and other community members thought it was their right to raid spaces in which we might be gathering, right? And so I think that's the difference between what is the spirit of the law and the application of the law, right? And that the application of the law is always going to impact the people most targeted by and large, right? Especially people who are going to be like, even when we think about people who are assumed to be engaging in quote unquote illegal behavior just by existing or walking down the street or being present, but a lot of times that is also Black trans people, right, who are just merely around,
It said Sodomy laws legitimize discrimination and harassment against homosexuals by branding all homosexuals as criminals. For example, an attorney in Georgia was denied employment to the state attorney general's office because she was a lesbian. So the court didn't find it like the court didn't define it as discrimination,
right,
because she was a supposed criminal under the state sodomy law. So it was kind of like another loophole.
Mm-hmm. It's also a way used to separate people from their children. It's also a way that people, so instead of even being denied jobs, like just being able to be denied housing. And so that the implications of those laws were so far reaching. And so all of us that are alive, that are old enough to be listening to this right now, have lived in a time in which sodomy laws were on the books and did not know the extent to which specifically anti-trans laws were also on the books, right? Because we know sodomy, like the Lawrence v. Texas was in 2003? Is that what it says? 2002, 2003? Yeah. Some anti-trans laws were on the book until like literally this last 5 years, right? So and some of them, and largely again, they argue about us as trying to hide our identity, that there's something of transness in and of itself that means we are purposely going out of our way to be deceptive to strangers or to other people that might try to that might want to know who we are. Yeah, and I think that whether or not people could point to those laws on the books in places like New Jersey or Ohio or other stuff, they can at the least understand a moment, especially as a trans person, when you've been treated as though your existence was a deception, right?
I wanted to read something, and just to add on to what you were saying about the Machete.
Mattachine.
Say that again.
Mattachine Society.
Mattachine Society and the Daughters of
Bilitis.
Bilitis. Thank you. I was like, I can't get it right. But in this particular article by the Washington Post, it says two of the first formally organized gay and lesbian rights organizations in the United States actively discouraged members from engaging in deviant expressions of gender and sexuality. Right. So they were gay and lesbian organizations, but the idea of like, we don't want you to participate in deviant, let me get the word correct, deviant expressions of gender and sexuality. Mm-hmm. And so, again, like when we're talking about these laws, primarily cisgendered white men and women that were gay and or lesbian, they embrace these laws against trans people. And I know you have some more history, but I just wanted to like throw that out there.
No, I think that's tied into, because I know Randy was talking earlier also about the lavender scare, right? So that kind of ties into a lot of them were, like, hey, these other people, they're terrible. They're this, they're that, but we're normal. We want white picket fences. We want, we want 2.5 kids. We want a house in the suburbs too. We also want the same land rights that you give our other white colleagues and comrades, we want all that, right? What becomes hard for me to talk about, and so I'm curious as to what y'all think about it. But so in the 1970s, when the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, so the book that is used by mental health professionals, takes homosexuality, right? And I hate the word homosexuality just because it's like, obviously it's a, it's a medical term. Yeah, it's archaic, it's a medical term, it's not. And so even though sometimes people will still use it sometimes, like I'll use it tongue in cheek, like I'm a homosexual, right? But obviously I don't like, if a cishet person calls me homosexual, we're going to have like an actual, anyone that doesn't know the difference.
Every right.
But so like there's this place in which, we were labeled as having specifically a mental disorder by the fact of just being first of being gay, and then once homosexuality was taken, which was a catch-all, right? So that was a catch-all for people who were cisgender queer folks, as well as for trans folks who were seen as not operating in accordance with our quote-unquote gender or sexuality, what have you, right? And that term, it's like, and it's not even just so much that we were labeled as having that disorder, but that the government often uses those labels to disavow of rights, right? after homosexuality gets removed in 1973, gender identity disorder gets put in 1981, right? So we do all the gender dysphoria, which turns into gender identity disorder, all these different things, right?
Right.
And so even when cisgender LGBT people ended up being safe, for some time, or at least, not being able to be implicated in that way, trans people were again thrown under the bus, and sometimes with the support of cisgender, gay, lesbian, and bisexual people.
Right.
And so there's this place in which to be trans means to acknowledge that, like, there's no trans community without disabled trans people. That's just like you can't, like, even when I think about, I was talking to a colleague of mine who even talks about, when we talk about even things like autism and stuff like that, I think it's like somewhere about like maybe 10% of the population is autistic, but 24% of trans people are autistic, right? Mm-hmm. And so that there's like that, we can't fight for trans rights and not also fight for disability justice rights. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that to me is also separate from the ways in which government used our identity or tried to place identities on people to, again, strip them of rights, right? And we see that with how they do that with the broader disability community, right? As well as who the government will conveniently label as disabled in order to strip them of rights. In the same ways that they labeled enslaved Africans that way, in the same way that they labeled indigenous Hawaiians that way to be able to take over land and things like that. So I think that's what's also curious to me, as how the mental health professional community colluded and still colludes, right? In ways in which they act as a stand-in to decide whether or not we are fit to live our lives as we wish, right? I don't know.
I don't know if you brought up Lucy Hicks Anderson.
I didn't just yet, because we've been, I think we kind of been, for me, talking about a lot of stuff. What I love about Lucy Hicks Anderson, for people that don't know who Lucy Hicks Anderson was, is...
I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to make sure we touched on that.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, so in the 1920s, she was a Black trans woman who fought the state of California, basically, for her right to be married, right? And so even when cisgender LGBT folks, in the 90s and the 2000s were fighting for gay marriage rights and same-gender marriage rights, no one brought up any of the trans leaders over the decades and over the years whose mere existence was an affront to the state, right? It had been fighting for the rights of marriage, of names, of all these different things.
Right.
They had thousands of people behind them, but because they had to live every day, in this world. And so watching how much the history of Black folks was removed from that, for those of y'all that remember, the kinds of organizing that was happening around gay marriage and same-gender marriage, as well as how many trans people were kept out of that conversation.
Right. I think, again, the fascinating thing about history is that in the 1920s, this Black trans woman was fighting. So it's nothing new. Again, it's nothing new. And we continue to act like in society that these things are new. And the more that we know, right, never known. And then and thank you, Mase, for bringing her into existence and her name into the space, because it's also someone I did not know. And again, we can look up Lucy Hicks Anderson's history now, and we can add her to the history that we continue to tell, that we need to continue to tell and speak her name, because she was fighting for us before we knew we existed, So just thank you. I just want to thank you for that, of bringing her into the space.
Most stuff. And there's, I'm curious as, as we kind of move forward, especially as we talk about, I'm still kind of thinking about this place around what does it mean for medical professionals and health professionals to collude in our oppression alongside of people that call themselves maybe, or imagine themselves as our comrades or colleagues in struggle, especially as cisgender LGBTQ folks. I keep thinking about this organization, HRC, right, which is one that comes up all the time, right? So the Human Rights Campaign,
Yes.
Which is another one. So as we looked at the legacy of the Medellin Society and Daughters of Bilitis, the Human Rights Campaign also picked up this charge of saying, like, trans people will come for you later. It doesn't matter if we use your stories consistently to get grant money or to get donations. It doesn't matter if we know that the people, and for those that are, I'm assuming that most people that are at least on Spectrum have heard of the Human Rights Campaign, but knowing that is the number one funded LGBT little t organization in the country, and is given so many lobbying rights and like so many different places to play where it gets to be a part of politics in a way that many underfunded organizations don't, and specifically fought for employment non-discrimination acts without trans people, and knowingly did so, right? And intentionally helped to pass legislation that didn't have us in mind at all. And then was somehow curious why we still had to be fighting for the rights of all LGBTQ folks around employment up until this last summer. Of course that happened, right? Because that's a slippery slope, right? That's a very slippery slope, right? But then
part of the article.
Say again?
I want to read this part of the article about the Human Rights Campaign. Again, from the Washington Post. It said, in 2007, the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ rights organization, infamously threw trans people under the bus by cutting a deal that left gender identity protections out of the Employment and Non-Discrimination Act after promising trans activists that they'd fight for their inclusion in the bill. I just wanted to just also give some things to what you're saying, to give some context, also some further context to what you're saying.
Yeah, little stuff.
It's like if people really thought about it, like if the government can control the health and the livelihood and the, progression of a people, what makes you think that you are not next in that? Like if we can have control over people and, and like have these laws, like the gay panic defense law that, a lot of people don't know about, that, like, just allow for people to just, again, harm us, murder us, use their whatever over us. Like, what makes you think that women aren't next? You know what I mean? Like, children, you know what I mean? Like, everyone who's not, wealthy, like, it really baffles me. And again, like, it's not new, like, it's all recycled stuff. And like, we mentioned the lavender scare. It's like it's a Cold War tactic. It's like, it's all like, it's not like a thing that's like physically happening, like it's happening, and it's like, it's a mentality. Like all of this stems from, the what is it? Let me see. Like when I was looking for the gay trans panic defense legitimizes and excuses violent and lethal behavior against members of the LGBT plus community. It's defined as the LGBT bar as a legal strategy which asks a jury to find what a victim's sexual orientation or gender identity is to blame for the defendant's violent reaction, including murder. And so say I didn't disclose that I was a trans woman to somebody, and they flip out and be like, oh my God, you deceived me, this is that, I whatever, like, that's fine. They'll probably get like a slap on the wrist and some probation or something like that for causing a disturbance or something.
Right.
And so, and then like when we think about the lavender scare and just how, again, like I hope I don't offend anyone when I say binary or cis. What do you, is there a term for people who, the LGBs that, were wanting to like, cis LGBs, the cis LGBs, like I don't want to offend, but
we sit here talking about the ways in which we've been intentionally left out of all this stuff. You're like, I don't want to offend you. Listen.
I was like, offend away.
Look,
be honest with people. Like, if this offends people, they listen. You need to get a thicker skin. It's being defined as cis, something that's never caused you not to have a job or never caused you not to be harassed, right? In and of itself, cisness,
If the truth offends you,
it'd be okay. Everybody
right?
be okay.
And this is the one, some facts too. I just wanted to read. That's what. So in the United States, the LGBTQ plus community makes up 3.5% of the total population, yet is vastly overrepresented in hate crime statistics. In 2007, sexual orientation ranked as the third highest motivator for hate crime incidents at 17% of total attacks, behind race 51% and religion 18%. And then when we think about things like the Lavender Scare, people don't understand that police brutality is not just a Black man's war. Like, police brutality was like the police were terrorizing trans, disabled folks. Like, they are the ones, they are the numbers that we're seeing. But, when we see a Black man be murdered, we think but it's like those were like, I think we tend to leave out that demographic when it comes to like police brutality as one of the things that's definitely the highest thing killing us,
right.
On top of, Black on Black crime, and family abandonment, all that stuff, less resources, all that stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to read that to like make sure people kind of get a little bit of context of like it's recycled behavior and like there's things that back it up, and you think that it's just the way things are. It's like, no, these are things that we are literally programmed to believe in and be afraid of. With the use of force, the use of death is supposed to scare us into being who we are, and so. It's a mess. And a lot of these states that you don't know have this law also, the Gay Panic Defense Law. So if you are not here in Washington, look up your state laws and see if there's a Gay Panic Defense Law. And that's literally a law that excuses the murder of trans people and Black trans people at that.
I was watching a trailer, a type of a trailer for the Lavender Scare. And it was so interesting that this white cis gay man said, his job, and this is back in, I believe, the 50s. What he said is that his job or wherever he was working for called him in for being gay. I think he was in the service, army or something like that.
In the government, for sure.
Yes, in the government. And so what he did was they forced him to name other people that were supposedly gay. He named those people, and what he said was, again, cis white male gay. What he said was, I named people who I thought wouldn't cause too much harm when it come to them. Like, that came out of his mouth, and I was just so
that it wouldn't cause too much harm if something happened to them.
Yes. So he named other people that were gay that he felt wouldn't too much harm come to them if he named them.
Like, it wouldn't be that bad if they were outed.
So I'm going to save my ass and throw all of you other people under the bus. And then there was another white man touted as, the starting of the what was it? The Pride movement.
The Pride movement.
And I can't think of what that is, but I would say go on YouTube. And there's some interesting things that you can find about the Lavender Scare. The movie itself isn't available unless you want to pay a whole bunch of money to see it. But definitely there's some clips and things, and I'll try to find it and put it in the comments.
On Instagram, I Love Being Manon has a really good image visual that's like really good and like straight to the point, has dates and like images. And yeah, like what Dani was saying, like the Lavender Scare was like a very, from what I researched about it, it was a very like, they're trying to, clear the government out of communists, and, people who are perverts are, are going to weaken the government, weaken the system. They're going to, they're going to be the ones to persuade us to go this other way. They're going to be, they're the weakest link. So they, like how they would, be like, you can find a homosexual, they would have ways that you can find and identify a homosexual and use that as a basis to fire people within the government, white people in the government at that. And so what I thought was very interesting was that while I'm thinking like while this Lavender Scare is happening in the government, how many Black and brown people, while that's happening, are being murdered and like getting even the like blunt end of that. You know what I mean? Like, because it was very like I didn't see any Black folks included in the Lavender Scare research or anything. It was a very like white, like again, like communism, like the Red Scare. They're very like, oh my gosh, like the civilization, but then like just thinking about what was the Lavender Scare like for Black and brown folks and trans folks and disabled folks.
So thinking about what we're describing now is like when you get to the lavender scare, it's like you have to be able to be closeted. So you have to be able to already pass. And so it's like the people that could not pass were not getting hired by the government.
No,
not at all.
So again, like even when we think about again, like so I'm trying to think of Jim, trying to think about this cat who was a Black trans guy who was arrested and interviewed by Ebony magazine in the early 1960s or so, late 1950s, early 1960s. Jim McHarris, right? So Jim McHarris when he was getting arrested, it was about him being Black. It was like about him just being already by default of being a trans person and being a Black person simultaneously meant that he was interacting with the law against his will all the time, right? So like the idea that that someone, like when I think about, again, going back to Lucy Hicks Anderson, right, who was, again, had to fight the state in the 1920s. I think about Mary Jones, a Black trans woman and sex worker in New York in the 1830s, right? Again, fighting the state in the 1830s, right? Those people were not going to be ascending into that space, right? And so even the ability to pass, right? Like we don't, I think we're often dishonest in the LGBTQ community that of how much that can afford you.
Yeah.
And people went out of their way not just to pass for themselves, but again, to pit themselves against other people who were seen as weird or too out there or too perverse to be a part of civil society, right? Because I would say, like, when you said that comment, Randy, about like, oh, these perverts are going to like, ruin the government. I was like, of course we would. Of course we would. What else could we do except for like destroy the very thing and the very state that causes us harm? Why not? Like that sounds like a perfect Saturday night to me.
We're definitely gonna come over and do the government.
Yeah, and just like I think so right now. Okay, so this is another thing that comes up for me. Like, so talking about government stuff. So right now, even like with transness, there's been this big push, of course, to make sure that trans people can serve in the military. I'm curious, like on a real tip, why we're invested in dying for the U.S. government, right? Or integrating into the military in that way, right? Like that. It's like, are trans people in the Middle East not important? Are trans people in Somalia not important? Are trans people in Sudan not important? Are trans people in South America not important? All those trans people are important. I don't want to put them at risk for my right to be part of an imperialist state's government.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just want to because I think, especially so I don't just say it's in Seattle because I see a lot of focus on that here. I know the focus is not just a Seattle thing. I see it lots of different places. It's just, it seems very antithetical to what we said, what many people need in order to survive. Not necessarily what we said we wanted, but in our need to actually survive beyond a government that does not understand us, see it for us, consistently puts things in our way to impede our ability to just be how can we serve a government that has trans and gay panic laws? Like, how can we serve a government that sees us, we have to beg to be seen as worthy of, until very recently, of keeping our kids as trans people. And in some places, you can still have your kids taken away as a trans person because you can still be seen as an unfit parent, especially as a Black trans person, right? A state that does not want to house all of us, right? But I'm willing to die and kill other people to be a part of that. I don't think that jives with me.
That's the thing that I'm thinking about in this moment is that this idea of this American dream, this fairy tale was not built for trans bodies, was not built for Black bodies. And we continue to chase this thing at what sacrifice? Again, it's like you're fighting for a government that does not see you as a member of the United States.
Not at all. I think you have a mental disorder.
Yes.
I think you have gender dysphoria.
And again, and from the context of disavowing rights, right? Like, because it's like some of us, like I do have mental disorders, right? Transness is not one of them, right? Like, you know, like and I say that because it's like the government, and again, that medical collusion. I think so much about one space I think about often is around the law, right? Especially as it impacts not just Black and brown, trans, and queer people. Like, so the first state to ever create any kind of protections around, like, especially like employment for trans people was Minnesota in 1993. Okay. Minnesota also at that time was the #1 incarcerator of Black people, right? So yeah, sure, you can get a job as a trans person.
Right.
As long as, you know, you're not a Black person looking for a job, but you could be some other kind of trans person, right?
Yeah.
Probably not a brown one, you know, probably not indigenous one, but some version of white trans, you can get a job, right? And so
maybe biracial.
listen, depending on
depending on the pigment. Depending on the pigment.
Right. I definitely want to make sure that we have about 10 minutes left in our show today. We talked about a lot of information, and this is something that we will continue to talk about in the near future. And thank you, J Mase, for giving us some history, some context to history.
Good reads too. Oh my
gosh,
like a lot of these things I did not know.
Right.
I was like, oh shit.
And definitely, go ahead.
I think to me it's important for us to know history stuff because it's like, you know, I know we say sometimes like, oh, you know your history so you can do is what I see. It's like it really, once you realize how long a conversation's been happening, you'll stop wanting to continue that conversation. Like once you know this conversation that you having around how you should be treated has not just been happening since you've been on this earth, but literally for hundreds of years before you're gonna stop wasting your time on that conversation and demand some other shit, right? It's like, I think it's so important for us to know about, again, Lucy Hicks and Mary Jones. It's important for us to hear names like Balboa, who've been trying to harass and call and kill Black and brown trans people since the 1500s on this continent. That is so vital for us to know that even our government, when they tell us that it's a new thing, that even they're lying because they know they've been specifically targeting trans people, especially Black, brown, and indigenous trans people for many, many years on this continent.
And if you are passionate about helping trans and non-binary people, things that you can do. There's the Lavender Rights Project. There's the Black Trans Task Force.
Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network.
Thank you. What else, Mase?
Liberation Medical School.
Liberation Medical School, yes.
So outside of Seattle, I'm thinking about, well, partially in and outside of Seattle, obviously the Black Trans Prayer Book. There's also the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, so it's giving mutual aid all over. Thinking about, what's going on? Now there's too many to name. Now my head is spinning. I'm thinking about Black Trans Media in New York. I'm thinking about the Okra Project. I'm thinking like there's, you know, Black trans people and brown trans people and indigenous trans people, we've been doing a lot of stuff with a little bit of money, okay? Like just a little bit of money, a little bit of funding, and a little bit of safety, right? Like that we've been creating on our own, right? So there's always ways to support and reach out to those organizations to make sure we're all funded, as well as individual people.
Yeah. And I want to really emphasize, and thank you for saying that, J Mase and Dani, but yeah, like do the research. Like please, like reinventing the wheel is, you know, doesn't always have to happen. And especially like when I think of, you know, people who are thinking like, oh, what can I do? What can I do? If you're at a spot where you don't know what to do, why not look into some research? Get a book. You know, there are so many biographies out there that go into detail about just what people, like what our revolutions have gone through. There are so many links and articles and folks who make like educational things. And I wish I had a resource that we started, but maybe we'll start that. But like a history log or something. There's also the Transgria, you know, like that's a starting point. And then you can like go through and like go through the sources of things. You know what I mean? Like we all like, I'm not gonna assume. But for those that do know or went to college, maybe, you know, learn like sources, like it's the same thing, but apply it to queer, Black, trans issues instead of like an academic, self-serving issue. Treat your studies and that, you know, for the good of people who are most marginalized. And then like it'll literally flip. Right. It will literally flip.
I just want to recommend Black on Both Sides by C. Riley Snorton. I think that's an amazing book for everyone to read. And I think it's, it's like automatically classic, right? Because what Riley has done around, so for people that are interested, especially in the history of Black trans people, please check out that book. It's so well done. It's very thorough. And it incorporates.
I have that book.
It's great. I love it. It's one of my favorites.
And I definitely want to add into that. Do not wait to be involved in trans Black lives when we are saying yet another say her name. We are another hashtag of Black Trans Lives Matter. There are Black trans people that are in need of help now. Again, there's organizations. Of course, there's individual organizations. Individual people, I'm sorry. You can go to Instagram. You can go to Facebook. Connections. And also strip away your thought process of what a trans person needs to look like to be worthy of your money, your time, your care, and your love.
Mm-hmm.
Again, just like Blackness and whiteness and Asianness and all these things come in different forms and shapes, so does Black transness. And if you are expecting Black trans women to look like those in Pose and other mainstream publications and things, then you're missing the whole point. And another Black trans person will die because you're too busy missing the point. And so, like my lovely co-host said, do the research, do your own research. And when you come across a Black trans person in need, help them the best way that you can. Okay? Your smile may save a life. Your dollars will help, but just your kindness may also save the life of a trans person, a Black trans person, a trans person of color. Again, give. There are a lot of Black trans women right now that are in need of finances because they want to make sure that they're living their best lives in their gender. And money is a barrier to that. So definitely check out Deja Baptiste.
Ganesha Gold Buffalo.
Thank you. There's quite a few others. I'm sorry, I'm not thinking of everybody.
Vision.
Thank you.
Tina Shea Monet.
Yes.
Amina. Yeah. There's.
And then hit us up as your co-host, and we can direct you to people in and out of Seattle that definitely need your help. With the Suli Fund, that is a way that we're going to also make sure that Black trans people have some resources. So donate to the Suli Fund. I will put that up there. Again, you can reach out to any one of the three of us through our websites, randyford.com, therandyford.com. We got to change that, therandyford.com. J Mase, what's your website?
Oh, jmace.com. So jmaceii.com.
jmaceii.com.
It's J Mase people.
Very easy to spell name. Very easy name. That is often misspelled, mishandled.
Never J.
Never J.
Never Mase.
Listen.
J Mase or J Mase the third.
Yes.
Please spare my friend the format.
And if you hire him, get it right.
Just get my name right. That's all I ask.
Get it right. If you advertise, get it right. If it's on the book covers that he so lovely have out there, his full name is on the book covers. I'm just saying.
Some people are shady boots.
And y'all know.
Shady
we will be back in 2 weeks.
2 weeks on the 16th.
Yes, our goal is to dig deep inside of HIV and AIDS and sexual help and help.
Right.
Sexual help.
Help and sexual health.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, and we will have a lovely special guest,
Yes.
Dr. Stefan E. Blantic, or Stefan E. Wallace is his government name. But yes, I call him Stefan E. Blanik. But yeah, the doctor's going to be in the house telling us all what, the medical insides and outs of HIV, the HIV virus.
COVID also, because he's doing really
COVID.
beautiful work inside of COVID, especially with Black people and HIV.
Yes, and we're excited to have him. So you do not want to miss that. And if you do, don't worry, because it'll be posted on our Facebook and YouTube.
Yes. And then I know in the near future that we will be digging into this topic again. So if you missed something and didn't think that we hit on something, we will definitely be talking about trans history and the exclusion of trans people inside of mainstream LGBTQ movement. So again, this will be definitely part 2 to the conversation. You all know how I like to end. J Mase the Third's favorite question. Okay, it's mine. It
is your favorite question.
But we have to. I'm gonna change it up. It's normally what's your joy? What are you fighting for?
I'm clear. No, I'm clear. For me, I'm fighting for Black trans people to have access to our history, to our legacy, and to our futures.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, I'm fighting for restorative justice. For sure.
I am fighting for healing for especially Black folks and Black trans folks and non-binary folks. And I have some things brewing, and I'll talk about that more later. But I think, and when I say healing, that's mental, emotional space of healing, which I think all 3 of us do that. So yeah, that I just wanted to end with that question, because also we don't understand what we're fighting for. Look, some people don't know what they're fighting for.
Yeah.
And it gets really messy. So that's it, everybody. That is our show for tonight. We will see you December 16th. And that's it. Thank you. We are The Living Room. Again, I am Dani Tirrell.
I'm Randy Ford.
I'm J Mase the Third.
All right, everybody. Have a beautiful, beautiful evening. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.